I think it begins by recognizing that it is a gear shift, right? And that might be harder for some people than others. And it might be harder for some genders than others. That's fine. So, like, we know this is a thing. So let's figure out, how do we do it?
Are you overwhelmed by motherhood and barely keeping your head above water? Are you confused and frustrated by how all the other moms make it look so easy? You can't figure out how to manage the chaos in your mind, your home, or your family. I get you, mama. Parenting with ADHD is hard. Here is your permission slip to let go of the Pinterest-worthy visions of organization and structure fit for everyone else. Let's do life like our brains do life. Creatively, lovingly, and with all our might. When we embrace who we are and how our brains work, we can figure out how to live our lives successfully and, in turn, lead our families well. At the end of the day, we just want to be good moms. But, spoiler alert, you are already a great mom. ADHD does not mean you're doomed to be a hot mess, mama. You can rewrite your story from shame spiral to success story. And I'll be right here beside you to cheer you on. Welcome to Motherhood in ADHD. Hey there, Successful Mama. It's your friend, Patricia Sung. It's ADHD Awareness Month, and look at me. It only took me 5 years on the podcast to pull together a series for ADHD Awareness Month. Just so you know, it is never too late. Every episode this month will be a new guest expert on the field of ADHD. I am so honored that these powerhouses are here to share with you. So let's dive in with today's guest. Today's guest is Dr. Ari Tuckman. Dr. Tuckman is a psychologist, author, international presenter, and ADHD thought leader, and he has been widely quoted in media, appearing on countless podcasts, and we are so lucky to have him here today. And he's also the conference committee co-chair for CHAD. So he is someone who has really jumped in and is helping the ADHD community, and we really appreciate the no-typicals who jump in and help us get things done and make things happen. He is the author of ADHD After Dark, Better Sex Life, Better Relationship. Today's conversation is a good one. It is all about how do we work in our relationship and account for our ADHD, both for ourselves, for our partner, possibly everyone. What are the ways that we can modify what we're doing in order to prioritize our relationships, and knowing that there is hope when you are struggling in your relationship, especially when it comes to intimacy. A lot of times these are conversations that are hard to have. And so I wanted to invite Dr. Tuckman here to give you that sense of like, hey, first of all, this is not only you. You're not the only one who is struggling with these things in your relationship. Second, like Dr. Tuckman's waitlist is a mile long, which is a bummer for us, but that tells you there's a lot of people that need help in this area. So it's not just you. There are plenty of people in line to be talking about these kind of things. And I want you to know that there is hope for you and your partner to have these really like awkward and uncomfortable conversations so that you can work towards bringing your relationship higher up on the priority list. We are talking about what are the things that we struggle with? What's hard about this? And what do we actually do about that? We're also answering your questions about how do we stay present in the moment when it feels like we're failing at being a good partner, whether it's in the bedroom or just in life in general. I want you to know that there is hope. So let's dive in and let's dig in to relationships and intimacy with Dr. Ari Tuckman. Now, fair warning, mama, some of these topics today are not for little ears. So this is an episode that you will want to pop in those headphones or hit pause and wait till time where you are on your own. Let's welcome Dr. Ari Tuckman to the show. How are you doing this morning?
I am good. It's good to be here.
All right. So I am going to dive right in and ask. Okay. So I was actually talking to Tamra Rosier last week. We were doing her interview. And she was like, I don't know how Ari handles all of us ADHDers all the time, being a neurotypical person. So I'm like, I have to ask. I'm like, one, how do you do it? Because you spend a lot of time with this, not just professionally, but you do a lot of volunteer work in the community. What's your secret?
You know, it's sort of a funny thing. So I don't have ADHD, but as I've sort of looked back on my life, right, like I reconnected with a bunch of friends from high school, and like two of those guys have ADHD, which in hindsight, it's kind of like, duh, obviously, but not that we knew it then because it was, dark ages. And then I think about a couple of my friends from college, and then I think about this friend of mine from grad school, and I'm like, I'll bet you $80 million she has ADHD, right? And it's just like, there's clearly an affinity there, right? Like I'm sort of drawn to the energy. And I don't know, it's just something, right? There's a resonance there. So I think in that sense, it's not an accident that I have I was going to say found myself, but I didn't find it. I put myself there. I had active agency in selecting where to be in the world. So yeah, it just, I don't know, like there's a fit there, and I think that I appreciate everything that's great about my friends and colleagues with ADHD. And I think that makes the difference.
So how do you balance that? Like how much you appreciate the good parts about us when obviously there are
Mhm.
parts that can be quite annoying or frustrating and what have you, especially as we're going to dive into like this whole idea of like relationships and partners and how do you work with people with
Mhm.
ADHD? How do you
Mhm.
find that balance so that it works for you and it's not overwhelming?
First, I mean, you don't have to have ADHD to be annoying to people, right? Like we all have things about other people that sort of annoy us and things about us that annoy them. So there's always going to be that balance. There's always going to be that give and take. You always need to find ways to negotiate differences and different preferences. And that's not unique to ADHD. I think one thing, though, that maybe is a bit different, or I think the ADHD stuff can be more visible, right? It can be more obvious. It can be easier to say, well, but because of that, obviously I do this thing, right? So it's easy to sort of justify your own bad behavior by pointing at your partner's ADHD or your friends or coworkers or whatever, right? So there is that, but still there's always two people involved in the interaction. Both people have an opportunity to make choices that influence what happens next and how both people feel about it.
And did you come by this wisdom from anywhere in particular?
I definitely I've had this thought before, but like couples therapy training has really sort of influenced this thinking or has kind of refined this perspective for me because we can all point at what our partner does and say, because of that bad behavior on your part, obviously I do this thing on my part. But the
Mhm.
problem is, it's not like their bad behavior is where the story started. I mean, unless you met them like 6 minutes ago, then you could sort of take that position, right? But once you've been together a while, there's 80 miles of history behind you, and
Mhm.
everything gets connected to everything else. But it's really sort of this idea that if you give away all the responsibility, if you put all the blame onto the other person, what you're saying is, I'm basically the passive recipient of what you do. So I'm just going to have to cross my fingers and hope you do something different, which I don't know. I don't like putting my happiness just sort of out to the universe and hoping for the best, right? I'd like to have some influence over what happens next. And I think whenever I see couples or I present on, couples therapy, particularly when one partner has ADHD, I'm always sort of hammering this idea that the non-ADHD partner has a role to play here too, not as a favor to the person with ADHD, although I'm all in favor of being generous, but as a way to sort of take care of themselves, right? Like learning about your partner's ADHD helps you be happier in their relationship. It helps you be a better partner to them, but it also helps you get more of what you want rather than being frustrated and resentful and powerless over things that are happening that isn't what you would like to happen.
Which I think reminds me of like we have a mutual friend, Liz Lewis, and she talks a lot
Yeah.
about like it's not just the ADHD. We can't just blame everything on the ADHD. There's a lot of other stuff going on. And I think when we get into a relationship, especially when either both parties have ADHD or one of them does, like so
Yeah.
much blame can get dumped on the ADHD that we often forget like, well, couples who don't have ADHD on either side still have problems and
Yeah.
things are still going to happen in life. You're going to have interesting in-laws and you're going to have job issues or, job loss. There's going to be struggles with kids. Like there's always going to be life happening. It's not just the ADHD. Yes, it sure is in there,
Yeah.
but there's
Yeah.
always struggles within a relationship and learning how to work together. And so, yes, we're going to do our darndest to figure out how to make this work, but it's not the
Yeah.
only
And I think
bone.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I think that there's potentially a bit of an intersection here if we talk about ADHD and gender and parenting, right? So, like, if you're a woman with ADHD married to a guy with ADHD, which not everybody is, but, with that, right? As the person with ADHD, right, that makes for those easy to point at sort of visible, obvious things of like, I wouldn't be so mad if you weren't late all the time or whatever, right? But also, then being a woman, you're more inclined to sort of take it upon yourself, because the way we raise boys and girls, guys are better at being like, well, this is kind of crappy, but it's not my fault. And girls and women are more likely to say, oh, that didn't work out well. Why did I do badly? And then if you've lived with ADHD, probably undiagnosed, probably untreated for most of your life, all the more reason to sort of blame yourself and take it onto yourself. So it very much sets up a problematic dynamic where the woman with ADHD, right? And then, of course, there's that whole saint mother thing of like, as a mother, you should be forever sacrificing and you should never ask for anything or expect of, or like that whole nonsense thing, right? So, like, it's like you're really kind of dug deep into a hole here where, it is all about you and you should feel bad about it and you should do it different, except you're not getting the support to do it and, blah, blah, blah. But also like, your spouse doesn't love this situation either because it's not working out for what they want either, right? So it's kind of like nobody really feels good in that situation.
Yeah. And what I always try to circle back to, because like even my husband and I have done a lot of marriage counseling as well, and he does not have ADHD. Like where we always come back, like counselors constantly like, you guys are on the same team. It's not you versus them. It's not the like offensive position. It's how do we come together to deal with this issue? And when we can come back and remind ourselves that we're on the same team, we both want the things to get better. It behooves us both to find a solution here. It makes it a lot easier to move forward because you're both working towards the solution. And again, you're not feeling singled out or left behind or it's your problem. No, this relationship owns to, like we both own it. And without both people working towards it, I mean, we're not going to get very far. So.
Yeah, exactly. Like you give up half the agency and half the influence if you say, this isn't my problem, go figure it out.
Yeah, which like I would definitely deal with. Okay, so like where to start? I have so many questions. Okay, I'm going to circle a little bit around ADHD for like one more question here. When we think about how much you have worked with folks in the community of ADHD, what are those things that you find surprising that most people don't know? Like they don't see those themes in their relationship where you can step back and go, oh, I've worked with so many different couples. I see these things popping up where when we have one partner with ADHD and one without, these sorts of things pop up versus when we have both partners with ADHD, I see these things frequently popping up. What are those things that really surprise you that aren't talked about as much? And yet you're like, this is a thing. This matters.
Mm-hmm. A big thing that I think comes up is the whole question of how much should your partner be your external executive functions? Like that's a really common topic. And it can sort of go both ways, right? Sometimes the non-ADHD partner wants to be more of the executive functions, do this, do that, don't do this, remember, blah, 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 right? And it becomes a bit more kind of micromanagey than the other person wants. Sometimes it sort of goes the other way, which is you should just be able to do this on your own. I'm not going to get involved, but I am going to be unhappy when it doesn't work out, or the partner with ADHD is sort of pulling and saying, I need more help with this. I need you to help me. And, now there's definitely also a gender split on this. Like these are not equally represented on, if we're again talking about straight couples, which not everybody is, but if the guy is ADHD, it's more likely that the female partner is going to sort of step in and try to help out. And because that's how we're socialized. Whereas when the woman has ADHD, I think it tends to go more the other way, where the guy might be frustrated with the outcomes, but is perhaps less involved in the inputs in the process. So that is a discussion to have, right? How do we find this balance where both people feel like they're putting in the right amount of effort and both people feel like they're getting out what it is that they're hoping for?
And what have you seen that helps rebalance those two sides?
I think it begins with really sort of talking about like, what are we doing here, right? What do we want? How do we want things to be here, like end results? And then it's about what do we need to do to get there? What is possible? What's maybe possible, but not worth it? So kind of where do we begin to make some cuts? Where do we sort of accept some things a bit more as they are? Really being intentional about like how much we take on, right? Because it's easy to add stuff and it's good, except for the additional cost of like time and effort and energy. And, so I think picking our battles is important and then not getting into this FOMO comparison kind of a thing, and rather for us, for our family at this point in time, what is going to work best, and then within that also carving out and holding sacred time as a couple to not just do the business conversations of like, wait, what's happening with soccer practice? And like, what are we doing this weekend? And what are we doing this summer? And, I think the sink is dripping and all that stuff, but also the fun stuff, right? Like, let's do that part too. So managing life and managing ADHD and managing whatever so that you can still have fun together, meaning you have the time and energy, but also the goodwill that if you want to have fun, you want to have it with your spouse and not just with anybody other than your spouse.
Wait, I mean, obviously, most of the people who are listening are moms with kids who are still high need. So, yes, we have moms that are listening from their kids are grown all the way to moms who are future moms and don't have kids yet.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the people listening are going to have kids probably like sub 10. And how do you create that space as a couple, knowing that we're in the thick of it. Like my boys are 6 and 9, and it's good. It's definitely on the easier side now that the youngest is 6 and, can actually do things for himself. But how do we create that space to spend time as a couple when you're in this phase of life where it is just nonstop? And if you don't keep an eye on the humans, they don't do well. So they need constant supervision.
Yeah, I know. They need to eat, they need to sleep, they need to survive the day. So, I mean, so some of it is, it's just accepting some of the reality of like, this right now is sort of what it is. It does get easier. I remember when my son was like less than 1, although honestly, he sucked at sleeping till he was about 2 and like literally just surviving the day,
Mm-hmm.
It did get better, obviously, right? Gradually it gets better. So some of it is that reminding yourself that this is not what it will forever be, but also really, I don't know, being intentional about what you take on and what you don't. So I think that that's some of it. Certainly, if I look back, there's so many things we did. I'm like, why were we doing all of these things, like all these house projects and all, like, God, what the hell, So, being a bit smarter about that, having a bit more of the long view of like, yeah, we'll get there, right? It's not going to be done now, but like, we'll get there. I think using the resources that you do have, which maybe it's family. I mean, I didn't have family, nearby when, my son was small, but like friends and, like using the resources that you do have and just somehow carving out like at least even just little bits of time. I mean, it's not going to be like a week in Paris or anything, but, even just a little bit of time where you can sort of have some fun and enjoy each other, I think is really important. And it just can't be the last thing to happen, which means it's a thing that never happens.
Well, I want to circle back when you're talking about communication. Full honesty, like this is one of the things where my husband and I struggle a lot on, because I think this is a frequent pattern of, especially for women with ADHD, is we do a lot of thinking in our heads, but we don't actually communicate those things outward. Which creates a lot of struggle because my husband's like, well, I don't know what's going on. And in my head, I have already discussed this 16 times. So I think that it's been sorted. So how can we learn how to communicate better when we do so much thinking in our heads and actually be able to get it out and to our partner?
I mean, that's definitely a thing, right? That if we think about it, that somehow that translates into a memory of having talked about it, but those are not the same thing. So, I mean, I don't know, somehow perhaps capturing externally this thing, and it might even be text like, talk about vacation or whatever, right? Just like, that's it. And that's like some sort of a hard reminder that like, we need to talk about this. But I think some of it is, and again, this is hard to come by when life is sort of crazy and busy, but just having some protected time where the two of you are in the same space and hopefully there's not too much else happening. And that then gives you the moment to sort of reflect, be like, I feel like there's probably some things to talk about. I wonder, what have I been, ruminating about recently? And that this can't be in bed the last thing that happens. Like we used to, I mean, we don't do this anymore, but like we used to do this thing where we'd get into bed and my wife would be talking to me and I'm like barely keeping my eyes open, right? Like my eyelids are fluttering. suffering, right? And I'm dying and she's really unhappy because it's a worthless conversation. So, I mean, some of it was for her to make a point of bringing stuff up earlier and not waiting until the very last thing. And part of mine was just being more available earlier so that, we could have a conversation at like 8:30 and not like 10:30, but even 10, sometimes even just that little bit of difference makes a big difference.
So finding that place, like within your family runnings, obviously every family is different, but making that available, because I agree. Those 10:30 conversations, they never go well.
No, they don't, right? Like we don't have the energy for it. We don't remember it well. We don't really want to get into it. And the last thing you want to do is have a big fight like right before it's time to go to bed, because then you don't sleep well and you're more tired tomorrow. So there's that, right? Like prioritizing some earlier time, putting in the effort. And I know it's hard because you feel like I don't have any effort to spare, right? Like all my effort is already accounted for and then some. But, making a point, which again comes back to the extent that you can, not taking so much on so that, you do have a little more space. And I get it. Like that's not always possible, right? Sometimes it just like, it is what it is. But if you can carve out a little bit of space, I think that that's important. I think also to sort of like use the time that you have, and to not slide into like, oh, I'm going to load the dishwasher or I'm going to check my email, or it's like that idea. Your priorities are not what you say, they're what you do, right? So if it's like, honey, you are the most important thing in my life, which is why I give you the least amount of time when I have no energy and attention. You're so important to me. You get those last 4 minutes right before I pass out. That's how important you are to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've definitely had to make a change. We usually divide and conquer when my husband's around. He travels a lot for work. When he's here, like I take one kid, he's got the other, we get him in bed.
Yep.
And then it's so easy to just like, it's over. Like we made it through bedtime. And both people just kind of like retreat to their corners of like, now I must recuperate. And that modification of like, first we check in together and be like, is there anything we have to deal with? We need to discuss. Like just having that touch point has helped a lot. And so then if he still really wants to watch, basketball or whatever, like football, whatever the sports are on, and I'm like, I still got to go clean up and, get the kitchen in order for tomorrow. Like either way, we can still go back and do the things that we would have done anyway, but having that touch point of like, do we need to discuss anything? Is anything going on has been a really good change in the pattern to allow us that moment of connecting. Like, do we do it every day? No, we don't. But more often than not, having that touch point in has helped. If there's any way that you can talk about it earlier in the day too, like if I can catch him at, his lunchtime or something, that makes it easier too. It's like, yes, most of the time when your partner's working, like at lunch, they don't want to talk about things either. They want that break. But again, like you said, it's, if we're saying that this is important, is that a sacrifice we're willing to make and give up 10 minutes of your lunch break in order to make sure that everybody knows what's going on?
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of, I mean, I'm not going to say this part is easy. And I get it that you need to sort of track time and whatever with what I'm about to say. And that's harder for some people than others. But it's also a thing of, sometimes sort of being intentional about kind of using some time well. So, like talking about bedtimes, like, I mean, I know that it's easy when we're sort of a bit tired to be like, whatever, we'll sort of get there. And, things sort of drag on and a few other things happen. And, and then lo and behold, 8:30 bedtime, it's now like 10 of 9 before you're done. Whereas being a bit more like, no, we're on a mission, right? Like we're doing this, right? We're getting this kid down, right? And really being intentional about when you start the routine and sort of pushing through and like, nope, we're not petting the dog. Nope, leave the dog alone. Here we go. Where's your toothbrush? This is what we're right. So kind of shepherding it along a bit more so that there is a little bit more time. And it doesn't have to be hours upon hours, but if you think about it, where maybe you only get 10 or 20 minutes in the evening, if you can add 10 minutes to it, you've now doubled the amount of time you guys have, right? Like sometimes it's just that little bit that makes the big difference. So to say we're going to have 2 hours to talk might be completely impossible, but 10 or 20 minutes more, like that I feel like somewhere in the day I can scrape out another 10 or 20 minutes. Okay, yeah, let's make that happen.
So on the same topic of like when you're wrapping up bedtime and you're like, can we get another like 10 minutes in the same time tends to be when couples are more intimate. And this is a huge struggle for a lot of folks with ADHD. And we'll see how far we dive in here. But on that same note of like one of the hardest things for moms, especially when you've got kids around, is then being intimate after I have run all day long.
Yeah.
And now I have to like switch gears into a different mode. What can we do to shift those gears so that we can get out of overwhelmed mom mode, doing all the things, and into that space of like, now I'm focusing on me and my partner in this relationship?
I think it begins by recognizing that it is a gear shift, right? And that might be harder for some people than others. And it might be harder for some genders than others. That's fine. So like, we know this is a thing. So let's figure out, how do we do it, right? And that some of it, I think, is on you to sort of be intentional and say, like, this is also important. Like right in this moment, now that I've gotten the kids to bed and cleaned up their, crap in the living room and, made mac and cheese for tomorrow or whatever it is that we do. Now that that is done, this next thing is also important. It's important to me. It's important to my partner. It's important to the relationship. I need to sort of begin to get myself into the mood. So it's not a thing of you get me in the mood. I get myself in the mood by being receptive, by intentionally sort of moving my thoughts and feelings in that direction. So some of it is that. But I think also to have some conversation about with your partner, like what can they do that will facilitate this happening, right? So as in, like, if you could go and throw everything in the dishwasher, like clean up the kitchen and get everything that gets me one step closer to being able to carve out the time and whatever. Or if instead of going and checking your email and taking 15 minutes doing that, if instead you could do this other thing, right? And to kind of talk about how do we sort of facilitate this? How do we sort of get ourselves into that better place? And, hopefully mostly it works out okay. Sometimes it won't. Fine. But also, if this is only once in a blue moon that it happens, it's a lot harder to be like, that's fine. We'll try next time, So having it happen, something happens often enough, having alternatives, right? So it maybe some nights it is the full production and maybe some nights it's a lot less. What else can we do instead? Because feeling like you have to do something doesn't make it fun and sexy, right? And that kind of like, pressure can be a real desire killer for next time. So what can we do to have both partners be happy to be there? I'm all in favor of generosity, right? We should be generous to each other, but it has to be freely given generosity, as in like, I feel good in giving it and I feel good about you afterwards, so like, let's talk about what that is and let's talk about what gets in the way of that, so there's that part of it too. But I think it's just sort of a thing. I think, again, especially as a mom, especially as a woman, especially as someone with ADHD, it's really easy to get into this, like, I can't ask for what I want, or like, I have to do all these other things before I can take for myself. And like, that shouldn't be true. Like you should be able to have that time just because you can, like, because you deserve it, just because you do.
My other like 3 questions that popped up. I'm like, ooh, where do I go first? Have you ever been invited to a party and you realize like you weren't going to know many people there? And so then you like dreaded all the way going up to the event, or you talk yourself out of it so you don't go because it's scary to put yourself out there in a situation that like, what if I don't like them? What if they don't like me? And it feels stressful. Well, I don't want you to feel that way about hanging out in this community, mama. So I am hosting an open house and I want you to come and meet all the mamas so that you know what kind of people we are. P.S. We're great. And that you feel comfortable joining in this community. Because if you are thinking about joining Successful Mama meetups or thinking about joining the retreat, I want you to know that these are your people. And what better way to do that than to actually meet the people? So come join us at our open house. We are hosting an open house in Successful Mama meetups on November 6th. And come meet the moms, hang out, see what it's like. You'll get the feel for like, who are these people? What's the vibe? Do I want to hang out with them? Yes, you do. It's going to be so fun. So come hang out with us. So it's totally no charge, free, $99. Come hang out at Successful Mama meetups on November 6th. Our meetings are on Wednesdays. They're at 12:30 Eastern, go over to my website at patriciasung.com/open house. It's all one word, OPENHOUSE, and sign up for the link so that you get the Zoom link. Remember, this is all virtual, so anybody can come anywhere in the world. See what time it is on your time zone and come join us for the first 30 minutes. We hang out and get stuff done. So I have help there for like how to plan your week. Or if you just like, I just need to get some stuff done and the body doubling helps, do that. Like, there's no wrong way to show up and do stuff at Successful Mama Meetups. Did you get something done? Great. That's what we're here for, okay? So that's the first 30 minutes. And then the second 30 minutes is social time where we hang out and we make it fun. You actually want to show up to the body doubling because you get to hang out with your friends and meet people who understand how your brain works and you feel at home. So come join us November 6th. Sign up at patriciasung.com/open house, and I can't wait to see your face. And if you are listening to this after November 6th, still go over to that link and see when the next one is. I think I'm going to do this again. I'll see you then. Okay, on to the episode. A lot of times there's advice around, well, if you want to be intimate later that evening, you should do something earlier to communicate that so that both parties will know. And then, like you said, like, let's move this bedtime along. We have somewhere to be. But a lot of times when you have ADHD, like that was not on my mind 2 hours ago. 2 hours ago, I was arguing about this science project. So for those of us who have ADHD and 2 hours ago, that was not on my radar. What are some of the things that we can do to make sure that we're communicating that this is where we would like to head this evening so that both parties can then head in that direction?
Yeah. So my first obvious advice that may not be that helpful is, when you do have the thought, then, send a quick text or whatever, right? But like you said, sometimes you won't, right? It's just the day is busy and whatever. So there is something to this idea, and a lot of people sort of, throw up in their mouth a little bit at the thought of it, but like, scheduling sex, or at least I'm going to take a line from Ian Kerner where he calls them windows of willingness, right? As in like Thursday nights, I'm willing to see where things go. I'm willing to be convinced, so it's not a blood oath, right? You're not like committed whether you want to or not, but it's sort of saying, this is a thing that's important. We're going to do our best that this is a time when something happens. And again, maybe it doesn't. Maybe this is not the night, but generally I'm going to show up with some good intent and I'm going to put in some effort to be sort of interested and to be available and to be receptive. So I think knowing, here we are Thursday afternoon, this is, like it can then sort of begin to get us in the mood. So begin to sort of think in that direction, begin to think about what do I need to do to make sure that like when we do get there that, we're in the right frame of mind and that our lives are in the right situation, that this is something we can both feel good about.
And then how do we have those uncomfortable conversations? I think there's a lot of people who, like, as a general rule, but for sure for women, like when it feels really awkward and uncomfortable to have these conversations with your partner in order to know that this is happening, like where do we start even on like step one to say like, hey, I want to have a conversation about this to even begin with? Maybe we should have a window of willingness on Thursdays. Like, how do we even take step one to be like, let's talk about this really uncomfortable thing?
Yeah, I think you start out by saying, this feels really uncomfortable. And also, I'm a little bit worried it's not going to go well. Just call it, right? Like, not news. I don't think your spouse is going to fall out of their chair when you say that. But I think to sort of acknowledge it and to say, I know that this is important. I know this would be good for us. Or I know this is important to you and I haven't been as available. Or this is important to me and you haven't been as available. I know this is a thing that we've struggled over. So kind of some acknowledgement. And to really sort of make a point of saying, I want us to have a good conversation. I want to be able to sort of express my position of how I feel about this. I want to hear what your position is. And especially in the beginning, it's a lot more about questions than statements, so like, don't tell the other person what to do. Don't get to the solutions too quick, but like, let's try to understand it. Why is this important to you? What are your concerns? What gets in the way for you? What gets in the way for me? And to really try to understand what the situation is and to call back to, what you said before, like we're on the same team here. We both want want this to work out? How do we sort of find a way to make it happen? How do we negotiate our differences? Again, it's about trying to understand each other and to be understood more than it is to sort of like make commandments or say, this is what needs to happen.
Knowing that most of these situations that we're talking about here, at least one person has ADHD in the mix. What are some intros or other like signals that you've seen work for couples to say, like, this is the night I want to meet you in bed? What are the ways that that either partner can initiate and that it will tend to be better received by someone with ADHD, knowing that we do tend to get, sensitive about things, which is okay. But how can our partner or us relating to the partner reach out and like say like, this is the day, what do we do? What are some of those things like you've seen that work that don't feel super uncomfortable or maybe just slightly less uncomfortable?
Yeah. Right. That might be a little uncomfortable and that might be okay. So I guess the first thing I'll do is say two things that don't work. One of them is to sort of vaguely sort of say something and your partner misses it, right? Like don't be too vague or subtle and expect your partner to mind read, right? So sometimes you just need to sort of say it so they know that you said it. That's one thing. Another thing not to do is to make it sort of like a demand or a command, right? Like you're not ordering it on Amazon, one click, but rather to say, I would be interested. Now, maybe the recipient is interested, or maybe they will be interested, but also I am interested does not obligate you to fulfill my interests. It's just stating I am interested. So that's part of it, is to be able to say no, right? That both people are able to say thanks, but no thanks, or maybe not that, but what about this? So, but to sort of be clear about what's being communicated and then to sort of work together to figure out how to get there.
Another frequent struggle for folks with ADHD tends to be idea of being like overstimulated, and that sometimes the physical touch is too much and then it creates this hurt feelings by the other side. What are some things you've seen that help in overcoming the overstimulation that sends things in the wrong direction?
The first thing is to have some conversations about this, but not in bed and when you have your clothes on, right? Like not in the middle of the action is not the time to be having this conversation. So, to have some conversation about it, to say, for me, this is what this is like, to make it clear that it's nothing personal and it's no sort of comment on your partner's moves or their attractiveness or whatever, or your feelings for them. It's just sort of like, I don't know, this is just my nervous system. What are you going to do? Right. So nobody gets their feelings hurt, number one, but also to have a bit of a game plan of like, look, if I'm feeling overstimulated, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm asking of you. Or if you're not sure, to then ask, right? Like, let's use our words in the heat of the moment. And, if we sort of shift gears, fine, whatever, which is really kind of exactly the same thing if something feels painful or uncomfortable, or if a guy starts losing his erection, or like number one rule, don't freak out. Like just move on, right? Like plan B, okay, shifting gears. What do we got? What are we doing here, right? Because it's the freaking out that's the problem. It's not being overstimulated, or this doesn't feel good, or I know it felt good 2 seconds ago, but it doesn't now, or yesterday it did, but now it doesn't, or like just talk, right? Talk about it. Keep the long game in mind, which is we want to enjoy this experience, whatever it is that is. To take a line from Emily Nagoski, who's written a couple awesome books on sex, especially sex and women, pleasure is the measure, right? Like, are you enjoying what you're doing? Is it an enjoyable experience you had together? Great. Now, unless you're actually trying to get pregnant again, right? Like a sexual experience could look lots of ways. Now, if you're trying to get pregnant, it's got to end in
narrows it down.
Yeah. One specific thing needs to happen. But otherwise, right? Like it shouldn't be sort of like written in stone, right? Like make the experience into what you want it to be, even if it turns out to be a bit different than the experience you thought you were going to have going into it.
Can you talk to me more about that difference in expectation versus reality, and how do we lean into that?
I think it's about, again, it's like really sort of being flexible about it, and to have this idea that there's no one right way. meaning two people don't have to have the same desires in that moment, but also even within yourself, you don't have to have the same desires, and that you can be flexible and you can shift. And it is about the pleasure, right? It's about, am I enjoying what we're doing right now? Does this feel good? And to take whatever kind of performance pressure off of it, because it's the pressure that's the problem, right? And the expectations then is what sets the pressure, whether it's pressure for yourself, pressure for your partner, pressure for how, body parts are supposed to function. And some nights you might be full of vigor and up for anything. And other nights it's been a hell of a day and we're going to do something smaller, but it's still going to be fine, right? And to enjoy it. And maybe, again, a bit of that long view of like, right now we got young kids who are sucking us dry, but, in time we'll have a bit more space for us. So like, this is not what it will be forever.
Yeah. And I think that like now, not now thinking that comes into ADHD, like when it's hard right now, we feel like it's going to be hard forever. And having kids in your house is a season. It's a long season, but it's a season. And you won't be sleep deprived forever, and you won't have people vomiting on you forever. And soon enough, your teens will be out later than you want to stay up, and things will shift. But it's hard to see that in the moment. And also the idea of like, what's the goal here for both people to have an enjoyable time is a very different goal than I think usually what we go into the evening looking at. Like most people, when this is the night we're having sex, like that's a whole different goal than can we both have an enjoyable time? And another question we had from the community from Sarah is she wanted to get some insight on a lot of us with ADHD have like trouble staying present in the moment and getting like lost in the thoughts while being intimate, and kind of like, one, why is this so hard? But then what do we do about it so that we can be present in that time when you look at, we actually got here and now I'm worried about, I forgot that permission slip that's due tomorrow. Like what, why is this so hard? And what do we do about it?
Yeah. And that's definitely a thing that can happen. And not just to people with ADHD, but maybe a bit more so, maybe also more women than men with ADHD. And I have some data that backs that up. So I'm not just making things up here. So my thoughts are, on the one hand, and this is easy to say, but try to create a bit more sort of order in your life and the systems that are going to make for less forgotten permission slips and whatever, right? I mean, easy to say. Some of it is about kind of taking that time to sort of beforehand or in the early part of like, okay, here we are now, to sort of begin to mentally transition into this kind of different mindset. But it may also just be a thing where you kind of talk to your partner about like, look, if there's something like bugging me that I just need to say it because I know you're going to remember it and then we'll move on. Or if I say it, I'll remember it. So, like in the middle of things, say like, damn it, I think I didn't fill out a permission slip, right? And then for your partner around and being like, why are you talking about that? Rah, rah, rah. Right now we're fighting and not like moving on, to just be like, okay, got it. By the way, don't care, not the thing I'm worried about right now, but okay, honey, right? And we're back. And to just sort of recognize, like, this is a thing that's going to happen. It's totally fine. It's not a big deal. It's only a problem if you make it a problem by, again, freaking out about it. And when you notice yourself being distracted, just like bring it on back, right? In that sort of mindful sort of a way, just bring yourself back, come back to the present, come back to your body, come back to what is feeling good in this moment, come back to those sort of sexy thoughts of what do I want to do next? Like to come back into the present moment and not be too up in your head.
And I think a lot of us have patterns of the things that distract us during those times. So if we can look at what our patterns are, like if it is this like to-do list things, like, oh, the permission slip, like, oh, I forgot to get, lunch meat at the grocery store. Like if it's these kind of things, it's like, okay, well, how do we earlier in the day create space for that? That's one thing I think is underrated for those of us with ADHD, is like creating that white space for us, our brains to kind of like mill around. It's like when you're in the intimate moment, your brain's not doing anything else. So all of a sudden there's the white space of like, your brain's like, oh, wait, you know what? All day you've been busy and I didn't have a chance to let you know that there's no more turkey in the refrigerator. Like creating that space for those things earlier can alleviate those things. So like, if that's the frequent pattern, is the to-do list keeps popping up, it's like, well, okay, let's put this to-do list earlier. But also when your partner knows like, this is eating at me, most partners are going to be like, I would rather you just say, I forgot to fill out the permission slip. And then we keep going rather than you be stuck in your head about the permission slip. And then you're not here in the moment with me when they know that that's the point. I mean, most partners are gonna be like, okay, cool. Don't care right now. Moving on. There's no judgment and shame in it because you've already clarified ahead of time that like, it's not a reflection on what's going on in the moment. It's just my brain latched onto something and I need to unlatch it. And if this is how I unlatch it so that I can be present, lovely. I think sometimes those thoughts can go, instead of it being like, oh, the things I forgot to do, it's like the things that are distracting you in the moment, like noticing that like, well, now the fan is blowing too much, or like, I feel like I'm too sweaty, or like those kind of things come in. Do you have any recommendations there of like, it's not as simple as, oh, right, permission slip later, got it. In the moment, those things are really grating on you. How do we address those without irritating our partner or hurting their feelings?
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the to-do list stuff, one thought is if you know this is a thing that happens for you, I don't know, just like take a second before, you sort of get into bed or whatever, and just sort of like reflect, right? Again, that white space, like you said, and just brain dump, scribble out like permission slip, question mark, turkey, this, that, just like dump it out of your head. So there's nothing left rattling around later, or there's less, right? That's going to come up. I think some of it also is we sort of touched on this before, but it's that like deserving this, right? Do I deserve? I mean, okay, there's always more stuff to do. And none of us think we're doing good enough jobs as a parent anyway, because it's, impossible standards. But like, do I deserve to have this time for me, to enjoy this, to take a bit, to receive? And like, there's that part also, and all these stupid nagging to-do list items sort of run counter to that, right? Because it's all about what are you doing for others. So there's that part. There are certain things, like you said, the fan is over there, right? That's sort of, there's probably not emotionally loaded about like the fan, whatever, but it's just annoying and it's weird and it's just there, right? So like, I think for that, you just try to like in that mindful way, just let that thought go and instead bring yourself back to the present. I think the whole like, am I too sweaty thing, right? Now we're getting back into that whole like, am I good enough? Is this okay? Does my partner, how does he feel or she feel? Or right, like all that self-doubt crap, like again, that's a thing, like let it go. Like you deserve to be there. You're fine. I promise you, your partner's just psyched for the opportunity, right? Like you might be worried about being sweaty. I don't think they're worried about you being sweaty. So like come back to the moment and let yourself enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's worth of the price of admission right there, is knowing like you deserve this time and that it is okay if you forget the permission slip because you were here with your partner and this connection point was more important than that, because you deserve this space and time to just be you and not worry about all the responsibilities that are weighing on you as a parent and a human that's, in the world today. Like it is okay for you to take that space and just be present and focus on you as a person instead of all the other things. So many times we get in our heads about, what do I look too chubby this direction, or that was a weird noise, like all those things that come in. And it's like you said, most people in the moment, sure, we might notice it, but like priority wise, not on the list right now. Like that's not where most people are focused. And if they are, like maybe this is like they're just like you of, oh right, like all of a sudden I'm worried about this thing that doesn't really matter in the moment comparatively, and that's okay. We can still have a really great time with our partner, even though there was a weird noise, even though I felt too sweaty, even though I felt like I was a little too jiggly here. Like that doesn't negate from the connection time that you have together, and that you are worthy of spending that, whether it's 10 minutes or 2 hours together, and focusing on what you two need as grown-ups.
Yeah. Because, it's about surviving not just the day, but the decades, right? If you give too much too soon, then you sort of burn out, and then you're not, besides not being good for yourself, you're not good for your kids. But again, you deserve to be good to yourself. Just like put a period on that. We don't have to put the second part of being better for your kids later. So
yeah, you deserve it just because you are. And I think that's like one of the hardest parts of being a parent, is that you get lost in all of the responsibilities and setting yourself aside in order to make these children wonderful people too. But that is so valuable for our kids to see that their parents prioritize themselves, because we want our kids to grow up as people who also take care of themselves. We want our kids to grow up and be in the kind of relationship that, yes, maybe we only, had sex for 10 minutes because we were running on empty because you have twins but it doesn't matter. It's the fact that you guys still made time for that. That's the kind of setup that we want to have for our kids to see. This is the kind of relationship that our family upholds, is like, we can make it work in between the SpaghettiOs. And if that means that the house is a little messier, but you had a good time with your partner, we can vacuum tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, it's easy to say when, hindsight 2020. And it's easy to say, oh, just do it tomorrow. There's always more things to do tomorrow. But, again, with ADHD, when we struggle with the prioritizing, is that when we get sucked into but tonight I have to get the backpacks ready and get the lunches and I have to call my mom and all that, when we get into that, well, I have to do all these other things. Sometimes we lose sight of how important our relationship is. And you know what? Your mom is going to love you tomorrow the same that she did today. Your partner, this is the marathon. This is the decades that we're pouring in. And it does take a lot of effort and teamwork together to be able to still be on the same page when your kids leave the house, so that it is worthy.
And I think there's also something to be said for hard deadlines, right? Like soft deadlines lead to a lot of creep, whether it's, bedtime or anything else. But, so if you have a bit of a hard bedtime, which is I need to be in bed, lights out by 10, that is a thing. There's no negotiation, right? That makes it easier than to not procrastinate some, say I'll do it later tonight, right? And things slide and slide and slide, and then you're getting into bed at midnight. But also saying we together are getting into bed at 9 because we were going to spend some time and we're going to fool around and we're going to talk and we're going to whatever, right? Or we're just going to watch TV together, even just that. But to say 9 o'clock, hard stop, right? And that's because if 9 is a hard stop, it means hopefully some other things happen at 8 and 7 and even at 1 or 2, right? That it can sort of push it into really at 1 o'clock or even 10 a.m. or 9 a.m. to hold in mind and to really sort of feel what 9 o'clock feels like at 9 p.m., right? That how do I feel when I'm just throwing a couple last things into the dishwasher? I'm all right, I'm here. Versus how do I feel that awful pull of I know I said that we would spend time together, but God, I have so much to do. I'm so stressed out about this. I'm not going to be able to enjoy it if I say, give me 5 more minutes. And then I know it's not going to be 5. And then, my partner's going to be pissed about it. And then so compare and contrast, and to really feel that future, and that it's not this vague abstract of well, whatever happens at 9, who cares? It's no, what happens at 9 a.m. absolutely affects what happens at 9 p.m. So now is the time to get some stuff done and to really sort of hold that in a good way so that you can then have that good stuff at the end.
Yeah. And that's it. We talk a lot about organizing our day in my community. We meet on Wednesdays and get our weeks together. And I'm ooh, I probably need to mention this one in there. When we are looking ahead at our week, it's not just doctor's appointment and all that. These are the important things too of if you want to have intimate time with your partner, where is that going to fit into this? And like you said, when you're just going, anybody, let alone with ADHD, when you're just going all day long and you're not anywhere near thinking about intimate time at 9:30 p.m., at 1 o'clock when you're rocking and rolling, it's not a priority and it's not going to happen. So it is a lot of this forethought, which is not our strong suit, but knowing that it is important to us, that's how we can start to make these changes, is that you don't have to make all the changes today. It doesn't have to be well, here we are, put it on the calendar. This is the day things are changed and it's all better from here. It's that constant moving towards it with your partner of we're shifting the way we talk about things. When we talk about things, we're having these awkward conversations to be able to say, this is important to me. I think it's also important to you. How do we come together and make space for this thing that we both want to happen? But when it's on the fly, it's not happening. So how do we figure out how to make it happen? That forethought allows us to bring space for it's not just about meal planning. It's also about making priority with your partner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I still could ask you so many more questions, but I'm going to rein it in. So before we do our lightning round questions, how can folks find you? So I guess tell us who are the people that you would be able to help? Who should be calling you for assistance? And then how do they find you? Send help, Dr. Tuckman. What do we do?
Yeah. So, unfortunately, my wait list is already too long, which I feel terrible turning people away. But best place to find information about my books and, some recordings I've done and other things is adultadhdbook.com. And if you go to the speaking page, I actually recently did this sort of 3-hour collection of a bunch of like 5 to 10 minute videos through this continuing ed company called PsyD. But it's a sort of parenting kids with ADHD. So that's available, all sorts of like, strategies and systems and stuff like that. So I've got that there. I've also got a productivity course for adults coming out pretty soon here. So that's also on the speaking page at adultadhdbook.com. So that's the best place to find my stuff.
Awesome. Okay, well, so time for the lightning round. You don't have to explain anything. You're just going to fill in the blank. All right, number one. The best thing that I've read or listened to recently is?
I read 400 and something proposals for the big ADHD conference, and there was so much good stuff in there. So hopefully that's a good enough answer. But I think it's going to be a really great conference in November. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some folks.
Awesome. I'll say I read quite a few of those as well. And it was, there was the gamut of,
yes.
Sometimes I was like, I'm gonna be honest, some of them were not good. And some of them were such awesome takes of like, wow, I never even heard about this, never even crossed my mind. I'm like, ooh, this person, I want to hear about this. Yeah, so I'm excited
definitely.
Too. Okay, number two, my most boring about me fact is?
I think I grew up in New Jersey.
Number three, when I'm having a rough day, my go-to quote, song, poem, book, podcast, activity, whatever is.
Oh man, I'm so good at favorite songs. Like there's so many, but just like anything, I would have music on 24 hours a day if it didn't drive my wife crazy.
Number four, don't tell anyone I
guess don't tell anyone I really still love 80s heavy metal.
Nice. Okay, five. If I had a magic fairy wand for one spell, I would.
I would do something political. I won't say what. I would do some things to change politics in America. I'll just say that.
And number six, my best piece of advice for mamas with ADHD is?
Take care of yourself. That one I didn't have to think about.
Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom and letting us know that there's hope, that we can work towards these things that are uncomfortable and a huge part of our lives and our relationships. But yet you gave us some really great starting points to have those conversations, and that there's hope. It can get better.
It does get better.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I really appreciate it. For more resources, classes, and community, head over to my website, motherhoodinadhd.com.